Hi, and welcome to the When Women Fly podcast. Each episode, I have poignant conversations with women who fly, run, surf, ski, climb, or otherwise soar, and possess a passion for life that is infectious. These are honest and insightful conversations about dreams and reinvention, often in the face of uncertainty, doubt, or other impediments. We talk about busting paradigms, grit, working hard, and playing hard, all while building a community around the empowering metaphor of flight. I am your host, Sylvia Winter, a pilot, runner, mother, skier, list maker, and apparently podcaster. I believe that when we share our stories, own our fears, and dismantle our perceived limitations, the possibilities are boundless. Whether you're pursuing your passion or simply love the idea of possibility and wonder, this podcast is for you. Thank you so much for joining me today. Let's get started. In today's episode, I have the immense pleasure of sharing with you my conversation with Refilwe Ledwaba. She is a social entrepreneur, girls' education advocate, and pilot from South Africa. She is also the first Black woman from South Africa to fly a helicopter, and she is also the first Black woman to fly for the South African Police Service. Refilwe founded the Girls Fly program in Africa to encourage young women into STEAM careers, whatever their background. The vision is to create an Africa where every girl is educated, included, and empowered. She credits her upbringing, led by strong women in apartheid South Africa, as the inspiration for her success. But as you will see, Refilwe herself is an inspiration. She organizes lessons and training camps, first in Botswana, Cameroon, and South Africa, and now expanding broader in Africa. She became an Obama Foundation Fellow in 2019 and is also a Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation goalkeeper, a role she uses to advocate for women's rights in Africa. We talk about the burden of being a first. She says, "For a long time, I was the only Black female that was holding the highest license for helicopters, but being the first for me is not important. The importance is the 20th and the 30th. And then we can start talking." And so we do. We talk about being a first. We talk about knowing when to pivot and when to dive deeper as an entrepreneur, coming through personal tragedy and its effect on work and decision making, her unbridled commitment to exposing rural areas of Africa to design thinking and diverse STEAM careers. We talk about unimagined opportunities and what happened in 2020 and the stresses of COVID alongside the mandatory pause and the benefits of using that time to reflect personally and professionally. As a changemaker and an optimist, Refilwe uses her wit and vision to collaborate, create, and empower. She has captured the attention of many and takes an energized and fresh approach to how to think about building and leading visionary projects as she introduces a new generation to the power of setting audacious goals in Africa and also solving real life needs like accessing clean water and sanitation and technology in remote areas. So enjoy my conversation with Refilwe Ledwaba. Refilwe, thank you so much for joining me today. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
You are a social entrepreneur, a girls' education advocate, a qualified helicopter and fixed wing pilot instructor. But how do you like to introduce yourself?
I think that's quite an interesting question, especially if you've done so many things and you actually not defined by one thing. So I think the first thing that when I introduce myself is actually talking a little bit about my name, which is Refilwe. So Refilwe, it's a Sotho name. It means given. And the Sotho people, they're actually called the Pedi people. They are found in the northmost part of South Africa, called Limpopo, and we're very well known for being very peaceful people. So I am South African, but I'm not currently living in the northern part of South Africa. I live in Johannesburg, quite a very dynamic city. It's just as lively as cities like New York or London. but quite interesting as well in terms of the diversity. As you mentioned earlier, I'm a social entrepreneurship. I'm a qualified helicopter and fixed wing pilot. I am passionate about youth development in Africa, but particularly girls' development. I'm also passionate about STEM. And I think it's sort of STEM, it's one of those hidden places where most of the solutions that we always talk about, that's where you will, probably found, kind of those solutions.
Mhm.
Also currently facilitating a first year university aviation management class, and I'm a flight instructor on a part-time basis. So I'm passionate about education as well. Avid traveler, and currently have an impact blog. So on my off days, I go all over the world, all over the country. But I just don't do that aimlessly as well. I don't just go to a country and post pictures. But my aim really is to positively impact communities through storytelling and tell their stories. When I go to Ethiopia, I want to tell their stories. And also, I'm an advocate for sustainable travel. So I hope that pretty much summarizes who I am in terms of the introduction. I did cut out some few things because there's quite a lot of things that I have done, and it's quite an interesting question as well. Who are you? And that's one of the questions I'm sure we'll talk later that I battled with because that's your identity as well.
Yeah, and the question also implies that you are or one is definable and able to be put in a box, which is convenient for the interviewer, but, can sometimes be a little awkward if, there's just so many dimensions.
Yeah.
And how did your childhood shape your approach to what you are doing now and the role of community, what those expectations may have been for you as a girl?
It's quite a very interesting question because I had a very, very interesting childhood. And I'm gonna start by just quoting Sally Ride because I think that quote really defines who I am and what informed or impacted, my life going forward. And she said young girls need to see role models in whatever careers they may choose, just so they can picture themselves doing those jobs someday. So as a young girl, I had the privilege of growing up surrounded by powerful women. I had my mother, who was a school principal. I had all my sisters going to university. My neighbor was a doctor. That whole street was full of powerful women. And it was that particular, what I've seen growing up. I thought it was normal for women to be powerful in that community. So I didn't grow up having any limitations as to what I wanted to do. So I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to become a doctor, and it's because I saw a doctor in the community. But what was so interesting as well, the women in our communities, they were not only professionals in terms of being doctors and nurses, they were doing things outside the community. I had my mother as a like choir conductor, she used to teach music, and she was so talented. She taught herself music, and she went on, she taught others music after classes. She was doing a lot in the communities. And the doctor, our neighbor, she built a community center where women could have vegetable gardens and do. So for me, empowering women, it was a normal thing. So I grew up thinking this is normal things. We become doctors and we go on and we empower communities. So that's what I grew up sort of thinking in my head. But most importantly, I grew up thinking education is normal, that everyone is entitled to be educated. I grew up with books at home. I read like from a very young age. I used to just read every book that you could come across. So for me, that was very, very normal. So I wanted to become a doctor, and I set my sight on becoming a doctor. And I went on to university to study for a science degree majoring in biochemistry and microbiology. But what was so interesting as well, it was that the community actually shielded us from the reality of what was happening in the world. I grew up during apartheid in South Africa. So within my community, I didn't have any limitations, but the limitation that was set because of apartheid. So number one, even though I had access to the education within that community, the education that we were getting was inferior. It was called Bantu education. That was the education that was meant for a certain demographic in South Africa. Even though I knew that I could become everything, that everything was still defined by what the government, allowed us to do. Yes, I could be anything, but not anything in that context. And I think it was, even though the community shaped who we are, when we did get out, we realized that actually there were boundaries
Mhm.
that were set. And it was quite interesting. So, as a woman, as a Black woman, yes, I could dream, but those dreams had limitation because of the context, not because of my community. So, that was quite two interesting worlds.
Do you remember a moment when that was revealed to you? There was a dimension beyond your pod that you hadn't been aware of?
It was those little moments that when I reflected later in my life, they actually become apparent. But when I was young, we didn't really see them because we lived in a kind of in a township where you will go to town once a month or once in 2 months. And town, it was where you will actually get mixed demographic. So I didn't actually realize that you had a side that was for Black people and a side for white people because I was very, very young. And I think it was, when I went to university that you start seeing that, there is a difference between, certain groups and certain demographics. But I think one of the other things as well was because of the education system that I was exposed to very early on, it had an impact in my progress, as an individual. And I had to work 10 times harder to literally catch up to where, mostly where everyone was. I was lucky enough that my last 2 years I went to a private school, and that actually helped transition me. I didn't do very well, but I did well enough to get to one of the best universities in Africa and study for a science degree with an opportunity to go to medical school. But that path and had a major impact, that particular education. And finding myself right at the transition of pre and post apartheid, I think we're the generation that had a bit of both, like a lot of the pre apartheid and a lot of the past apartheid and the impact that it had and the good and the bad. So those are the two things that defined my path, that sense of community and what it instilled in me, but that sense of resilience as well, of not accepting, what was the path that I was supposed to have taken. And I think it started at that early age, but that sense of community gave me that fighting spirit because I saw that women were just doing whatever that needed to be done to sustain, kind of whatever that was there. So yeah, I had a quite an interesting, yeah, childhood.
Yeah, yeah, and you were right there in that inflection point of the democracy and all the mess that ensued, but you were in the leading edge of that change too, which on top of just your own personal development at that age, which has its own load of complexity as well.
Yeah.
What an incredibly intense time. So you went to school thinking you were gonna be a doctor, but you ended up learning how to fly and going down the track of aviation. So talk to us a little bit about that pivot.
Yeah. It is quite interesting as well because it goes back again to, my childhood where I was allowed to dream, but my dream had boundaries as well. So I never thought I could become a pilot. I never thought aviation was a career choice because even within that context, that's one thing that we're never exposed to. I've never seen a female pilot. I've never seen a Black pilot to even. So the closest I've seen a pilot was on TV, when you watch movies and the demographic of those pilots that I've seen on TV didn't look anything like me. So I've never even dreamed of become a pilot. It was during that university as well that I took my first flight. In that first flight, there was a female pilot who was, a female who was a pilot. I wouldn't say that changed my mind in terms of becoming a doctor, but that ignited like sort of an interest. Aviation, pilot, this is quite interesting. Women can become pilots. That for me was quite fascinating and it was quite interesting. Even though I didn't realize it, it was the first spark. And it's only later when I reflected and meeting that woman again and working for the same company that we worked for, and I understood the significance of actually what had happened that particular day. It sort of stayed with me because I remember her voice from the flight deck. This is the pilot speaking, and she went on, and I was like, okay, wow, that was interesting. But for me to be able to actually kind of understand that interest or even interest is because of the way I was brought up, being curious about anything. If I was just somebody else, I was just going to let it slide. But my curiosity was what? Women, pilots, and just doing a bit of research as well. Because that's how I was brought up to be. I was going to go there. I'm like, no, no, I'm going to check this out. What is this? And then that's where, that initial spark started. But, sometimes I know a lot of people don't believe in fate, but somehow for me, a lot of things just kind of, added up and played a role as well. So it happens when I finished my degree with the aim of going to medical school, I couldn't continue to medical school, mainly because I owed the university money. I spent 4 years there paying them half of what I needed to pay them, and student loans as well. I worked part time to be able to pay them. Still, it was not enough. But I was very, very fortunate as well that the university didn't, because normally they will exclude you, they wouldn't allow you to continue with your studies if you owed them money. But I was so involved. I mean, I played soccer. I was at house committee, so I was a very, very, very involved child, and those things helped me as well because they didn't check me out. They're like, no, no, she stays. She plays for the first team. You sit inside, and we'll give you a sports bursary while we edit and whatever. So I had to make my own way. But unfortunately, I still had student loans. I had still had outstanding amount. The university that I went to was very, very expensive. It was the best university in the country. And it came in with a price.
And you were in Cape Town.
I was in Cape Town, yes, yeah. So I had to find a job to actually pay back and then go to medical school. So the interesting part, what the university does is they withhold your result when you owe them at that point, and they withhold, so you don't graduate. So I couldn't apply for a job as a scientist. I couldn't apply for a job, using my degree because I only had second year results. And people want to, that your degree, but the university wanted their money. So I had to find a job that doesn't require my degree, that required other skills. And the job that I found, it was quite interesting as well how it came about. Because my sister's friend said, no, 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 there's this company, they're looking for cabin crew. I'm like, okay, cool. Let me send my CV, and because I looked at the requirements, you needed a bit of work experience. And I worked as a receptionist, when I was at, so I had customer care. But it was so interesting that even my experience was not enough for cabin crew because they wanted a lot of customer care experience, a lot of you needed to work with people. And at some point you needed, at least a degree in tourism and management. And I had none of those. So I wasn't even thinking that I would get in as cabin crew. And I didn't know how to swim as well. It's not something that we do in the townships where we've got pools where we needed to swim. And one of the requirements is you need to know how to swim.
Oh, interesting. So for cabin crew just for cabin crew for a commercial flight,
Yeah.
that's, one of the requirements. Okay, that's very interesting.
So you need to know ditching.
Okay, so another obstacle.
Another obstacle is again, so I applied and I really didn't think that I will get in. I kid you not, it wasn't even 2 or 3 days after my application that I was called for an interview. I went for the interview, and I mean, I said that this is what I wanted to do, and then the science degree as well, and the fact that I didn't know how to swim, and I didn't think that the interview went well. And I mean, within hours, I was called for a second interview, and they're like, no, there's box spec pool there. They normally work with them. I can go there and take flying lessons, and then wrote the psychometric. From the day that I put in my CV to the day that I got a job, it was probably about 2 weeks.
Huh, wow, what a surprise in a pleasant way.
Very surprised. Yeah. And then I started as cabin crew. And there were, I think, those two moments as well. It was, yes, I got a job, but I was sad and I was despondent because I had worked so hard in my life. I did everything right. I was a good student. I'm supposed to be at medical school, but I'm a cabin crew. And because I didn't really understand what cabin crew does there, like as in the work, and you know how they used to call cabin crew, like you waitress in the sky kind of thing. And for me, I had a science degree. So that despondent it was really major. And I started training and I'm like, but this is interesting. The stuff that we're doing, there's more to cabin crew. It's not about serving tea and coffee. It's about safety of the passengers, but the skills that you're learning, interpersonal skills, communication skills. And some of the instructors used to tease me that, are you sure you're in the right class? Aren't you supposed to be in the pilot class? That was quite another interesting thing as well.
Because you liked the systems and the way things worked, and you were really curious about not just doing the cabin crew job, but actually the whole aviation aspect.
The whole aviation, yes, aspect of it. And when they were talking about numbers, I mean, we had to learn about UTC, GMT, Eastern Time, whatever. Those numbers were easy. I'm a scientist. They came easy for me. So it was quite interesting. But I think, again, the community that was around me in that company that I started saw something that I actually didn't see. Because it wasn't only the instructors, the pilot used to call me in the cockpit. They're like, oh, Refilwe, come sit here. You're supposed to be sitting here, which was quite interesting because a lot of times, especially as we've got the narrative as a black woman that because most of the pilots were white male, and the expectations were they wouldn't be the people that would actually support me or encourage me, but it was actually the people that supported and encouraged me, and they were like, no, no, you need to be doing the flight. But what was quite interesting as well was the women in second year, the same company that I joined is the same airline that I joined. And the women that I had was now a captain on the 727.
The very first one from when you flew to Cape Town. Wow.
And she was actually one of the first female captains in South Africa.
Okay.
Interesting as well.
Huge impact that she had.
With huge impact.
So what started off as a job to pay your loans basically became something with a lot more interest than maybe you had thought before. And then you did go on and train yourself, and you became the first woman from South Africa to fly a helicopter and the first woman to fly for the South African Police Service. So what does that mean to you?
Yeah. I think that was quite something else. It's not something that I had expected. When I was busy taking flying lessons, it was not even at the back of my mind. I went on. And I think I need to mention as well, at some point, I was actually fortunate enough that I got into the cadet program, the SAPS cadet program, who paid for, my training. And during that training, it's not something that had occurred to me. It was not, and when it happened, I was like, oh, really? This is quite interesting. But I think the interesting part as well, my mom, who was not quite sure how to handle this flying thing, because she was set on me becoming a doctor, and suddenly I'm flying, wasn't really quite sure what am I doing? But I think she knew from a very young age that I had this wild mind of just doing whatever. And I'm glad that she allowed it as well in a way, and allowed us to actually just go haywire in whatever that we, what we wanted to do. And I think that day when I qualified and they started mentioning it, she understood the gravity of what just happened. She's like, what? And obviously she had to tell neighbors, oh yeah, no, that's my daughter, kind of thing. So that was quite interesting.
But she had been before that, she had been skeptical or just hadn't quite had that idea of what you could do or would do?
I think she was very skeptical, but from a point of the unknown.
Uh-huh.
Remember her exposure, as educated as she was, that exposure of her was limited as well. Where, in those times that she grew up with. I mean, being a doctor was solid. It's something that she knew. Being a pilot, a woman pilot, that's something that, that's unheard of. A women helicopter pilot. So I think it was a lot of uncertainty and a lot of, what am I doing? Am I throwing my career away by not following my dreams of becoming a doctor? So those were the things that I think she really didn't, kind of understand. But I think when it did happen, and what had just happened, that she was the mother of somebody that had broken barriers, she must have done something right to bring up kids that could go on and do something in this world. And I think, I mean, I remember when I got my wings, and she was getting interviewed as well, as the mother, and she was getting all the attention. And I was just standing there and I said, I'm happy that I could do this for her, for all the things she had sacrificed in her life. shielding us, making sure that we had a roof, being able to go to a private school in the last 2 years, and even today, I always ask her, how did you do it? Seven of us.
How did you do 7 of you, right? Oh my goodness. Superwoman. Yeah.
So when I look, yeah, it is. So when I just turned my head and I see all this media and they're interviewing her, I was just like, you know what? I've done it for her. This is, even though it wasn't like intentional, but it means somehow she got the recognition that I think she deserved.
Yeah, it must have been felt so emotional for you in a way to feel, yeah, that deep sense of gratitude for everything that she did to enable you to get where she was, and then to have it flip back and give her appreciation and spotlight, right? It's for her. Oh gosh, what an incredible woman.
Yeah, no,
Yeah. So there you are. So then you're flying, right? And you are now at that point, it sounds like you were getting the publicity because you were the first in these things. So maybe this is a good segue for us to talk about that experience of being a first and the burden that you and I have talked about before. And I know you've given a lot of thought to the complexity of that position, that role.
yes, you'll get all the attention, the media attention, the focus. But I think being the first, in reality, it does come with a lot of responsibility. There's that nice part of it that comes with, all the attentions, but it comes with a lot of responsibility. And I think the first thing is just acknowledging that it's that a lot of other people had come before you and they might have failed to reach that. However, the groundwork that they put enabled, it contributed to the success. And I think for me, that was very important, not to just say, I did this on my own. There's a lot of people that have come before me that might not have achieved the first, but they needed to be recognized as well. The people like our mothers that had to break all these barriers during the apartheid system, but couldn't quite get there. So I think for me, that was that's the first thing that, yeah. But the second thing as well is it gave me a platform to effect change in a way that maybe nobody else could do that. And effecting the change, it means as well just going that phase of focusing on the first, but on people that must really follow you. The second person, the third person, the fourth person, and really understanding and those challenges. How do I make the path much easier for them?
Mhm. So you're seeing yourself in a continuum, and you're appreciating the women who started paving the road that now you're on, and you're appreciating that part of your job is to continue paving the road for the women that are following you, that not just the first, but the 20th and the 30th.
Just like you mentioned earlier as well, we've spoken about the burden of being the first. The spotlight, it can give you the platform to do good, but it can also put you in the spotlight where you're not allowed to fail as well. And in every success, you need to be allowed to fail. If you cannot fail, you're not going to take risks of doing other things because you're going to be always being scared of failure. So when you've got that spotlight and you fail, your failure will be magnified.
Mhm,
It will be known because as much as they will talk about the good of what you've done, they will talk about the failures of what the mistakes that you've done. So you will constantly under the microscope of whatever. So your movement, you're like, oh, when you go and fly, you don't wanna, put in like extra controls. You're like, you need to be careful because I need to smooth takeoff and landing. If I do a hard landing, the whole world is going to know. That's the burden. The second thing, the expectations as well, in terms of what is expected. So for me, I knew that I had to pave the way, but it is expected as well for you to to actually pave the way and carry the load. That load can be heavy. It can be really be heavy. it's almost like you're not allowed to be on. You always have to be happy and always have to come up with a front that let me inspire people. You're not allowed to sit and say, well, I'm not actually, I'm not okay, I'm not doing well. But what was so interesting as well, because now you're starting to pave the way for the others in a territory that was previously, there's not a lot of people that were there. It can be perceived as being, in a way, a troublemaker. Because now you start questioning, why am I wearing oversized overalls?
Mhm, right, so you're disrupting the system, right, the convenient system, right, you're in the spotlight, you're expected to be a certain yeah, I guess you're accepted and then expected to play a certain role, and you have to navigate that and still be true to yourself, and how did that unfold for you?
It was quite interesting because there's unsaid rules that we don't normally, talk about. There's hierarchy. There is, a lot of things that you kind of need to follow. So on one side, you have to toe the line. And sometimes towing the line means keeping quiet, making sure that your own career progress without questioning why there's few of us. Why am I wearing an oversized overall? Why isn't there facilities that are, for male and they're not for females? Why is there not pregnant policies that are in place? It's a difficult line to navigate. And I think initially in my career, it was really hard because it was a territory that not a lot of people that have been there that could really help me out. And I made a lot of mistakes because at some point I was known as a troublemaker in a in a sense. And having that stick in your career, it can be a career killer in a way.
A career killer?
Yeah. Nobody wants to hire you, but your progress, those people that they perceive you as being a threat, they might go out of their way to slow down your progress.
Mhm. Were you perceived as being angry or just a disruptor or
I think more of a disruptor, not angry later on. But initially, it was more of a disruptor and not towing the line.
well, I mean, you're literally breaking the proverbial glass ceiling, right? And there's some shards in there, and it's hard. And you have to be in a system that allows you to be at the table, and they could easily just close the door and say, "Actually, we don't want this friction here. We were doing fine before." So, yeah, I can understand the complexity of that and how both just pragmatically it was challenging, but also emotionally and as a person growing into your career at that time must have been pretty intense. And you transitioned then into founding the organization, the nonprofit Girls Fly program for Africa. Let's talk about that and what that transition meant to you and what that has become for you. It's an incredible program.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I absolutely love that program as well. And I think, as I said earlier as well, it was important that I don't focus on the first, but focus on the women that after me, but also acknowledge the women that came before me. So that's where Girls Fly program in Africa, sort of came about. And it's a non-profit organization, like you said, and it's an information education STEAM program for primary, high school, and post-school learners. And our focus is on aviation and space. So we use aviation and space to teach STEAM principles. And the program we include the use of design thinking, we use technology, we use innovation, and we want to shape, empower, enable, and support the next generation of makers and solvers in the aviation industry. But the most important aspect of it, which is the last part, we want to do that while entrenching the spirit of Ubuntu. And I want to just touch on this aspect of Ubuntu. It's kind of a philosophy, it carries a lot of weight, for us. So when we translate it to English, is I am because we are, which again comes from my where I was growing up in that environment where Ubuntu plays an important role. in how the community was, in how we were shaped as people. So it talks of the bond that we share as as human beings, the necessity to support one another, of sharing and lifting as we rise. So all our program and all we do, we entrench the spirit of Ubuntu. Want when we do our programs, we want these kids to continue. Just like for me, the path of, you know, thinking about the second person, that second person need to continue and think about the 10th person. The 10th person need to continue and think about the 20th person. So we anchor everything that we do in a spirit of you are because of we are. We lift as we rise. So when we impact your life, we want you to continue on the spirit of Ubuntu and impact, other people's life and really change the world. So as much as we focus on STEM, as much as we focus on girls in aviation and tech, we focus on our main focus. And I'm going to just touch on our mission and you'll understand as to what our main focus is. So our mission, we want to transform individual and communities through the shaping of mindset and education. And, I'm going to speak a little bit to that as well. When we talk about transformation, when we talk about women empowerment, we always talk about numbers. But we wanted to take it a bit further to the grassroots, level. How do we shape mindset on that level where in few years' time we don't have to talk about women pilots? That is an acceptable thing, not for women, but for men as well in the workplace. When they come in, when they see a women pilot, when they see me walking through the airport, people don't turn and look. And that can happen at a very young age where we shape those mindset, where from a very young age, little girls know they could become whatever, whether it's in the STEM field, whether it's a pilot, but where also little boys know that girls can become those things. So we wanted to start in the communities with our programs by changing those mindset, by educating them that women can be absolutely everything that, whatever that they want to be. And I think for us, that was the first thing that we needed to do. Our second mission, we wanted to create an environment where girls are encouraged and inspired to take up careers and innovate in the STEM field. So one of the things that we realized is when we went to schools and we interacted with both genders, because even though when our organization is called Girls Fly Program in Africa, most of our programs are actually mixed. Only two are focused on girls. And it was very deliberate that we actually did that as well. So when we went to schools and we spoke about, like, we'll go into a classroom and we'll ask everyone who wants to become a pilot or an engineer. I kid you not, none of the girls raised their hands.
Hmm.
And the question is, how do we create an inclusive environment where girls can confidently, without even hesitating, say, hey, I could become an engineer, I could become a pilot. So we wanted to create that environment. And that's when we came up with some of the programs like our aviation space camps. That program is only for girls. And we deliberately made sure that we want to give them space where they can get to interact with us. All the mentees are STEAM professionals, pilots, engineers, astronauts, space technologies, people that look like them, but that are doing this care where they can see and just start breaking that, that mindset of not thinking that they could become whatever that they became. Again, it was quite interesting when we do workshops where they were mixed as well. We deliberately made sure that all the facilitators are females. Now it's a mixed workshop. Just imagine the little girls are looking, they're like, what? That person is a mathematician, and they're standing confidently in front of us and they're facilitating this workshop. Then I can stand up and say I can become a mathematician. But, little boys as well, they look at us, they're like, okay, wow. So, so this is normal. So it was quite interesting. So our mission, the second mission, actually addressed that. And the last mission, we wanted to inspire individual and organization to take action to transform communities and change the world, which speaks about the spirit of Ubuntu. So for us, I mean, I've achieved a lot. And it was quite interesting that we'll go into the rural areas where we go into classrooms that sometimes were not clean. And I'll pick up a broom and I will clean that classroom. No job was low enough for any member of my team of volunteers. And by showing them that your title or who you are, that's a title, you're a pilot, but who are you in the community? I'm somebody that comes and cleans the classrooms to make sure that these kids can have a nice environment in which to learn from. And that's how we transform our communities. That's how we inspire.
And explain exactly how you do I think just the camps, but maybe other programs too, where you fly in and that's part of the way that you act and demonstrate that the women can do and are doing these things, like flying into these rural locations where they've never maybe even seen a plane land, let alone a female pilot walk out.
So one of our programs that we have, Fly for STEAM, where we do actually fly into those areas. And I think one of the things that we do deliberately is to make sure that the aircraft is or aeroplane is flown by females. That's number one. So what it does, like, for example, when we land there, number one, they see this aeroplane, it is landing, two females are coming out. Already there's a shift in mindset because just like them, they might have seen on TV the demographics that normally the media portrays on TV, but not the reality. So that's the first thing that they see. But when we come out, we tell our stories, where we come from, communities, they start resonating with the stories. They start relating to us. It's no longer a far fetched dream for them to become pilots or engineers or whatever that it is, because they're looking at me. I was born in a family of seven, a single mother, which is a story of a whole lot of household. And this is what I had become. And I had flown in and I had landed that aeroplane. So they start thinking differently as to what are, we start, those limitations that I had when I was growing up, we start removing them, those limitations
You're planting these seeds of ideas, of what of possibility.
of possibilities, giving them role models as well. People to look up to.
And where are you going? Where you're not only in South Africa when you do these programs, you've expanded to other parts of Africa?
We have Botswana. We've done few programs in Botswana, and our partner organizations they've done few programs in Kenya and few programs in Cameroon. So when our vision is to create an Africa where every girl is educated, inspired, and enabled. That's what we want to do. Whether it's them becoming pilots or them becoming doctors, it's just that possibilities of them,
Yep. So you're not defining the ends, but the means is what you're really focusing on. And it sounds like 2019 was a real banner year for yourself and your programs. You were a co-signatory on a letter addressed to The Guardian marking International Women's Day, calling for equality for African women. And in the same year, you joined the US Department of State Bureaus of Education and Cultural Affairs in their Tech Women program as a mentee. And you were also an Obama Foundation Fellow and a Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation goalkeeper. So 2019 was a big year.
it was one of the most amazing years I would say in my life. Like it was really amazing. And I think as well it's the hard work that had happened that had put me, where I could be recognized and again be given that platform to amplify the voices of women and girls, not only in the STEM field, but in the aviation and and space technology. Earlier on, when I was going through my challenges, when I had to, change ways and do a lot of things, establish my organization, I didn't know that it would result in what happened afterwards. And I think sometimes, we do things and you sit there and you're like, you're working so hard. But I just felt that 2019 was a year when the world was saying, Refilwe, you've worked hard. Now start enjoying, kind of kind of the fruits of your labor. It was never my intention, but that came as a result of the hard work that I had put in, not only in the foundation, but my only personal development. Because for you to get into these programs or to be nominated to be these programs, as a only as a pilot, I wouldn't have made it into these programs. It was because I was a pilot. I was making a difference in my communities. I developed myself academically. So all those things that some of them I did in silo without realizing where they were going put me in a place where I could be given a platform, an even bigger platform to be able to, amplify, the voices of, the youth and the children and the girls. It was a journey that for years it seemed like there was this wall, but in just short space of time, for some reason, it started making.
It just everything yeah, just the floodgates were opened, and it sounds like it was just a rush of opportunities, and in those opportunities, a lot of camaraderie and networking that I would think would really bolster your initial mission that you could come back to. And then 2020 happens, and, we've spoken about what what that has meant to you and your organization and some of the actual internal work, both personally, but also within your organization that you're sort of grateful for. Can you speak to that?
So I think for us as the foundation, things were happening, things were going very well. We had all these plans that we were supposed to do, and COVID-19 hit. And suddenly we had all this closure where people were not allowed to do anything, were not allowed to go out. Now, if I can take you back, most of our programs, or not even most, all of our programs are physical programs. We have to go there and interact with the students. And the reason why most of our programs are physical programs is because of the digital divide. In South Africa, just like many other African countries, we still have a main problem of a digital divide. So all our programs were physical. We'll go to the schools, we'll talk to the learners, and do all these things. So that's how we've designed them. And suddenly, that medium was taken away from us, and we were irrelevant as a foundation. And the question was, why do we exist? Because that's the core of any organization and foundation. Why do we exist if we cannot, serve the stakeholders that we are meant to serve and carry out our mission? So initially, I mean, we went through a thought process. We're like, okay, we'll pivot. And everyone else was doing it. Everyone else was moving their platforms online. And I remember, organizations such as Women in Aviation International, they had an app that they started. It was online that kids could access. And some of the, as well, some of the schools moved their programs online. And we were sitting there thinking, okay, maybe we should have an online camp, you know, something like that. Maybe we should have an online. Everyone is doing it. So let's pivot as well. And at some point, we're like, okay, but whoa, let's take a bit of a pause. Let's do research and find out what the impact would be. So we went out, we did our own research, and we also, did research. And I'm gonna, like just sort of give you some of the statistics that we came across. So, from we got this from UNICEF, and they said, if you look at the digital divide, 94% of young people age 15 and 24 use internet in developed countries. That's developed countries. 67% in developing countries only use the internet of access. Only 30% in the least developed countries. Now, if you look at where South Africa and some of the African countries are, we're sitting at the developing and what do you call less developed countries. So that was number one. And then that is just a general where, we needed to find out the access of, that particular information. We did our own research as well in terms of the kids that we impact and we go to. How many of them have got reliable internet access? Because some of these programs, they're heavy on data and you have to have good connections. It's not Facebook where you can go light or anything, or where you need a smartphone, you need and we find out that only 5% could actually be able to access our programs reliably and do what we do. And then we said, then we like, we're in trouble.
Mhm. So you couldn't simply revamp your in-person program to be online and call it a day because the access would not be there for people that 5% of people would actually have access to that.
Yep. So and I mean, and everyone was like, but we're being left behind. There's people that are having podcast online and they're pivoting, they're doing all these things online. And I kept on reminding the team and the other members as well that were there, and they kept on saying, who are our target market? Who have we designed these programs for? Because the people that we're impacting, they're not online.
Mhm. Yeah, and in some ways, shifting online would have given you an online platform, and it would have made it visible for people like me in the United States to see, "Oh, wow, look what they're doing." But in a sense, it would have just been optics considering that you wouldn't actually be able to access the people that you're trying to actually reach, not me here in the United States, but, the girls in those remote areas that don't have high-speed internet.
Yep. I mean, the other argument was, that 5% perhaps we could serve them. But if we had done that, it means we're leaving others behind. And that is you widening that gap even further. I saw this when I was reading an article from UNICEF as well, which was quite interesting, that the digital divide, it actually limits most children from accessing the same learning opportunities and quality STEM education as their better connected peers, leaving girls further behind. So as much as we're saying let's go on, we're leaving that majority, of the public further widening that gender gap as well. So we didn't want to make that mistake of doing that. And when we design our programs as well, we're cognizant that technology plays an integral role as well. And if you look at the world, how much it's shaped now by the technological advances, and knowing how to operate that technology, it has become critical to the advancement of girls. They could use that technology for a lot of things to solve some of the socioeconomic issues that they are currently facing. And before I can even come to the design, it's something that I wanted to say as well, like right in the beginning, why STEM? Which actually ties to what we're doing. And there's a lot of research, and one of the papers that I've read as well, learning to think and solve problems like scientists and engineers can equip these girls with the knowledge, confidence, and creativity to address major challenges in their communities. So when we speak about technology and when we speak about STEAM and the importance of why we need to bridge that digital divide, it's not only that we want to see them looking nice at the airport wearing uniform or flying drones. We want them to solve issues in their community using STEAM, using that particular technology. You look at renewable energy, for example. How do they use sustainable energy? Those are the things that could be solved. You look at drone technology as well. If they have access to that drone technology, let's look at COVID-19, how drones played an important role in literally transporting goods from one place, to the other. The vaccination development.
So the design thinking aspect of the curriculum seems to be a core to fostering the skills to problem solve, identify the problem solve, iterate, and test. and be part of that solution system. Yeah, I love that that's sort of core part of the skills that you're focusing on. It's not a particular technological skill or, aviation or space or engineering, but the underpinning of that is so essential. If we don't get that right, then, we're kind of making robots, but it's really savvy. I just really am so impressed by your process of, creating the Girls Fly program in Africa, and also just the way that you're evolving in 2020, but also, moving up to 2019 too. It's really impressive, and the way it's scaling into Africa and your vision of having it be throughout the whole continent is hugely bold and aspirational. And yeah, I just it's your spirit is, so contagious and powerful. I love it. I love it, and I love how much you've been able to share. And you did mention that there were some personal rejiggering that you did in 2020, and I'm wondering if you can speak to that as we wrap up a bit.
Yes. So I think as well, on an individual basis, the COVID had a shock on a personal level. The first month was really hard because suddenly I had to sit and actually think and reflect. And that is scary because you have to touch on things that you don't normally want to touch. And sometimes it forces you to go back to some of the failures, some of the challenges, some of the even small traumas, or sorry, there's no small trauma, but some of the traumas that you experienced in your life, you suddenly are forced to, you're sort of forced to now face them because now you're sitting on another side and really thinking, what had just happened in the last 20 years? And that's exactly what happened to me. What had happened in the last 20 years? What am I doing now? And what am I going to do in the next 20 years? Because things have changed. And I think the biggest of my challenge was identity. Number one, who am I? What is it? I've always been known as Refilwe the first. That's my name, my identity. And to a certain extent, aviation was not on the top. It was not really relevant because everyone was just sidelining it in a sense that, it's not as important. Everybody was grounded. Then what is my identity? Because there's now people that are developing vaccines. There's people that are doing all these things. Where do I fit in all these things? Something that I had battled with, for a long time. The second thing was again, that burden of being the first. Look, people are looking up to you now. What are we going to do? Refilwe? What should we do? Because this is all these things they're happening to me. They're happening to us. Do you think we should continue flying? Do you think we should do so? I'm dealing with my own internal battles, but there's other people that are looking up to me that are saying, what are we supposed to be doing now? Because all these things are happening. So there was a lot of internal, I think, battles that sort of went on. But as well, I never dealt with a lot of my one of my failures that I actually sort of needed to face and what the repercussions were. Because what came out as well was I actually never dealt with the anger that came as a result of that failure. And it was only when I was reflecting and looking at some of the ways I was dealing with things that were happening around me that it went back to not having dealt with those failures, not having dealt with the disappointment. And being on that fast lane didn't give me a chance to reflect on that. And in a way, sort of, put those things in a closet kind of thing where nobody could actually see them. So being in a fast lane helped me to not deal with what had happened. And I think, that had a profound effect on the decisions and the person that I had become. And if I had to, maybe I can just go back to narrate just that one failure and, at what happened as well. So a few years ago, I transitioned from flying helicopters to fixed wings. But before that had happened, my career was going. Like I had just finished my multi-engine fixed wing license. I was starting my instructor's helicopter license. So at that time, I was a ATP helicopter pilot. I had finished my multi-engine fixed wing pilot. I went back and I was now doing my helicopter instructor's, license. Finished my PDBA. Was about to start my MBA. So things were really happening, and my trajectory. I mean, man, it was just going. And just in a spur of a moment, that phone call. I remember in December, I received a phone call. My brother was involved in a car accident and he passed away. And it threw me in a kind of a tailspin of, whoa, family and what had just happened. And I think things just happened in a blur. I quit my instructor's training, and a few months down the line, I quit my job. And then I joined an airline as a first officer. And things just happened in that quick succession. And that decision, I think, defined what happened afterwards. And in hindsight, not one of the best decisions, joining the airline at the time that I did. But if I didn't, I wouldn't be where I am as well, today. And I think it was at that point, when I joined an airline, things didn't go as well as I had planned. And it wasn't a good thing. Like, it wasn't things that happened.
It wasn't a good fit.
It wasn't a good fit. And it just things, when they say things just goes downhill, that's exactly what happened. And the most interesting part was that burden of being the first. I was now on the receiving end in terms of I needed support, a lot of support. But I didn't know how to ask for that support. And I didn't get any support when I was going through that. That whole image of, no, she's just a troublemaker again came back to, haunt me in a way, that because it was like not a lot of people wanted to be associated with me now, because in a way, I had failed. Nobody wanted to be near a failure. But when my trajectory was going up and I was in the media and everything, you were celebrated. But when things that were happening, and again, those things came out. Just like when you're famous, it will come out when things like that came out. And it was so those failures were amplified and they were there and they were out there. And you will hear comment of people saying, who did she think she was? Because I didn't realize when I was going up there that not maybe a lot of people were happy about that. I was thinking, everyone is happy, but not really. So that downfall, as much as the good things that I've done, were celebrated, both of them. And it really hit me hard. Lost confidence, I quit the job as an airline pilot. I had My identity was anchored around being a pilot, but that came up with financial loss as well. So it hit on a whole lot of sides. But it was so interesting. Even when I was that down, the expectations were there that I need to go on and empower, go on and inspire. And because of that burden of being the first, I never had time to sit, reflect, and heal.
Mhm. It's the weight of public scrutiny is very powerful, and it sounds like it really bolstered your upswing, but when things are tough, it really can be hard to set those boundaries and remain solid in your own sense of who you are and what you're doing. The whole public scrutiny is ooh, it can be really hard to deal with. Yeah.
You start having this, play in your mind that, perhaps people that I'm trying to empower
Mhm.
on the other side are the same people, some of them that are celebrating, saying, who did she think she was? And I needed to reconcile with that and ask my question, why am I doing what I'm doing in the foundation? And I needed to go back and redefine that, because by redefining it, that became not a problem at all. I wanted to make a difference. Whether I get anything in return is irrelevant. But I needed to answer that for myself, that I will keep on making a difference. And for me, the point need to be when I see those women succeeding, that for me is enough.
Mhm. So you recalibrate your whole network of what gives you joy and what sort of fills your bucket. Do you have any advice for yourself during given what you the insight you have now for your younger self?
Yes, I do. It's I think the advice for, or something that I think maybe I should have been, told, or somebody said to me, most importantly was, yes, keep moving forward, but pause, take a break, reflect, not to go back. So you can always, when you take that step forward, is much stronger, and it's based on a very strong foundation, which is something that I've learned as well during, the COVID-19. You have to pause. That's something that I wish I would have, yeah, that I would have been told. That's what I would tell my younger self, and that's what I would tell everyone. It's okay to stop everything. Not so you can, sit and say, "Oh, but everybody," go into the victim mentality. No, reflect and work through whatever that you need to work through. Go back. What happened? What have I done? What was my contribution? Celebrate in that pause your successes, and then anchor yourself and take a step forward, and then pause. And you keep on doing, because when you take that step forward, it's much stronger than the previous.
Gosh, that's great advice, especially as we turn into 2021. So I think that thank you for sharing that, and we're gonna have to wrap up, but I do love to ask what you're reading and if you have any recommendations these days.
Oh yeah. I love reading. Like I had said earlier on that, it's part of, kind of who I am, and what I do. And I find a lot of inspiration in a lot of books. So there's a memoir that I'm reading, Mighty BL Powers. It's actually quite an interesting book about the Liberian Civil War. But I think the most interesting part is how women played a role in actually slowing down and stopping that particular war. And it highlights the power of women working together, how they can create like just this unstoppable force. So I literally I love that, kind of that narrative of from a community perspective, and sometimes how we think women we don't have a voice, but if we actually stand together and have a voice, we can actually stop wars. Now take that perspective about stopping poverty, or it's actually, I love that book. It's actually a very, very powerful book. And the other story that I'm reading, Her Story, it's called Her Story, the daughter of Mojaji. So it tells the story of women across the African continent and the role they play in society. So again, I love the narrative of, because sometimes they talk about wars, but not a lot of people talk about the role that women, especially in Africa, plays in different roles.
Well, I will be sure to include those in our show notes because I myself would love to get my hands on those stories, and, I love just learning so much about what my guests are reading. Yeah, it's really wonderful. Do you have ways in which my listeners can find out more about you and your organization and your future plans?
Yes, and it's very exciting future plans. So I hope they'll follow us. We've got a website. It's for the foundation, www.gfpafoundation.org. And all our social media handles is at GFPA Foundation. So that's the foundation. So some of the work, and you can be able to as well catch up with some of the innovative programs that we've designed, that will be able to address some of those digital divides that I spoke about. So we're really going to have an exciting 2021. Not I think, we are going to have an exciting 2021.
Yeah.
And I spoke about a travel blog earlier on. So part of the fun things that I do, I visit all these lodges and African safaris. And you can follow me. It's called Ariye Stories. So it's the social media handles is at Ariye Stories. So, and then my website is www.ariye, Ariye is spelled it's Alpha, Romeo, Echo, Yankee, and Echo. So Ariye. Yeah. So www.ariye.africa. So Ariye means let's go in Sotho. And then on my own personal handle is just Refilwe. If you go Refilwe Ledwaba, you'll be able to access me on LinkedIn, and you can follow some of the work that I do, my foundation do, and the blog does as well.
Super. We'll have that all in the show notes. I don't want to make sure we get it all right, some of the spelling. I don't know if I wrote down perfectly, so we'll get it right. Oh gosh, Fubi, it's just been such a treat to talk to you. You're so inspiring and heartfelt and wise, and I just feel very honored to have had this conversation with you and to share it with the world. So thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you for also, I think, giving me the platform, and in the hope that my story can inspire the next generation or the next person. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the When Women Fly podcast. My hope is that you leave this conversation with a sense of curiosity and empowerment to hold on to what is important and let go to what weighs you down. Stare fear in the face. If you liked this episode of the When Women Fly podcast, be sure to share and subscribe and let us know what you think. We love feedback. Be brave, be bold, and fly. See you next time.